We're moving forward with an ambitious new plan backed by more than $40 billion of investments in Canada's North and Arctic. Investments to defend our sovereignty and to deter new threats. Investments to connect, build, and transform Northern and Arctic communities. With this plan, we are taking control of our future. We will no longer rely on others to defend our Arctic security or to fuel our economy.
For generations, the Arctic was viewed as distant, isolated, and mostly symbolic. A vast frozen frontier that appeared on Canada's map, but not always at the center of national strategy. But today, that chapter has effectively closed. Prime Minister Mark Carney has just introduced one of the most ambitious Arctic initiatives in the history of Canada, a sweeping national plan worth more than $40 billion. A plan that envisions highways stretching across the tundra, deepwater ports along the Arctic Ocean, new military installations across the Northern Territories, and an entire economic corridor designed to reshape Canada's northern frontier. But this announcement was never only about infrastructure, and it was never only about economic growth. It was about something far larger: power, because the Arctic is no longer a quiet landscape of ice and polar winds. It has rapidly become one of the most strategically contested regions on Earth. Russia is expanding its military footprint across the north. China has begun describing itself as a near-Arctic power. And increasingly, Canada believes that pressure may even come from a country that was once considered its closest ally, the United States. After months of increasingly aggressive rhetoric from President Donald Trump, including controversial comments about Canadian sovereignty and a highly unusual campaign to acquire Greenland, officials in Ottawa have started reassessing their entire Arctic strategy. And today's announcement may be the clearest signal yet. Canada is preparing for a future where it must defend its Arctic largely on its own.
And as part of our plan to rebuild, rearm, and reinvest in the Canadian Armed Forces, we must ensure that the women and men who serve have not only the presence, but also the reach to defend every corner of this region. To that end, we are building 4 new northern operational support hubs and nodes in Whitehorse, in Resolute Bay, in Rankin Inlet, and in Cambridge Bay. And we are upgrading our national defense infrastructure in Yellowknife, Inuvik, Iqaluit, and Goose Bay. These locations are at the heart of our mission to defend our territory. What they'll do is they will enable the forces to deploy aircraft across all remote areas of the Arctic.
To understand why Canada is taking this step now, you need to understand the geography of power. The Arctic is immense. Nearly 40% of Canada's landmass lies in the north, and more than 70% of the country's coastline stretches across Arctic waters. Yet for decades, much of this region remained sparsely defended and poorly connected. Many northern communities depended on seasonal ice roads. Infrastructure remained limited. Military presence was modest. For years, governments promised development, but progress moved slowly. Projects stalled, plans remained fragmented, and the North continued to feel isolated. Now, the global environment has changed. Climate change is accelerating the melting of Arctic ice. Shipping routes that once seemed impossible are beginning to open. Natural resources once locked beneath frozen ground are becoming reachable. Critical minerals, copper, zinc, rare earth elements, and vast energy reserves. Suddenly, the Arctic is no longer just a frozen wilderness. It is a geopolitical prize, and if Canada does not control it, someone else eventually will. Today's announcement is Canada's answer, a major national initiative known as the Arctic Economic and Security Corridor, a strategy that merges military defense, infrastructure expansion, energy transformation, and economic growth into one long-term national vision. The total investment exceeds $40 billion, and the scale of the proposed projects is enormous. And it is enormous because Canada faces enormous pressure, particularly from the policies and rhetoric of Donald Trump. During the press Q&A, one reporter unexpectedly tried to shift the discussion in a personal direction, Instead of asking about the Arctic strategy itself, the reporter suggested that Carney might be preparing to disappear on vacation while global tensions were increasing. The implication was obvious. Carney dismissed it immediately.
Canadians are seeing the effects of the war here at home with the price of the pump going up and up and up. And it's been reported that after this trip is concluded, you're going to be on vacation for the next week. What's your message to Canadians who are worried about just the state of everything going on, the uncertainty, as you're going to be less publicly visible after this trip is done?
I'll be, first off, it doesn't actually work out to a week. It's the first thing. Secondly, I'll be working through this weekend with the military exercises in Norway, meeting with our partners, meeting with Chancellor Merz of Germany. I'll be meeting the UK Prime Minister on Monday. I will be having a series of conversations during the week. I will be as visible as needed and as connected as always. As well, I would reinforce that one of the strengths of this government is we have a very strong cabinet. And one of the, I would like to think, one of my characteristics as a prime minister is I give authority to my ministers. So there's a reason why you hear a lot from the Minister of National Defense, from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, from the Minister of Public Safety, because they are very much on the front lines of these issues as much as I am.
But the most significant geopolitical consequences of this strategy may ultimately be felt in Washington. For decades, Canada relied heavily on the United States to help secure the Arctic through continental defense arrangements, such as NORAD. That assumption is now beginning to shift. Donald Trump's presidency introduced a very different tone to Arctic politics. He pushed aggressively for the purchase of Greenland. He repeatedly highlighted the strategic value of Arctic territory, and his rhetoric toward Canada itself has raised serious concerns in Ottawa. Suddenly, Canada's closest ally began to look increasingly like a geopolitical competitor. That is why Mark Carney's plan carries such importance, because it sends a clear signal. Canada will defend and develop its Arctic according to its own interests. The new military hubs, infrastructure corridors, and economic initiatives are designed to give Canada something it has historically lacked in the North: strategic autonomy, and that is exactly why this development presents a challenge for Donald Trump. A stronger and more connected Canadian Arctic means less American leverage in one of the world's most strategic regions. Instead of a weak and underdeveloped frontier, Canada would control a modern Arctic corridor supported by infrastructure, energy resources, and military capability. In other words, the stronger Canada becomes in the North, the more difficult it becomes for Washington to dominate Arctic geopolitics. What Mark Carney announced today goes far beyond infrastructure spending. It is a long-term strategic gamble. A gamble that Canada can transform its Arctic before global competition intensifies even further. Because the Arctic is rapidly emerging as one of the most contested regions on the planet. Russia is expanding its northern military presence. China is investing in polar shipping routes and Arctic resources. And the United States increasingly views the region as a critical arena for future power. For Canada, the stakes are enormous. Nearly 40% of the country's landmass lies in the Arctic, along with more than 70% of its coastline. Control of that territory will shape Canada's economic future and its national security. That is why Carney's plan is so ambitious. Highways across the tundra, deepwater ports on the Arctic Ocean, major hydroelectric projects, and new military hubs across the Northern Territories. For decades, Canada was criticized for neglecting the Arctic. Now it is launching one of the largest Arctic investments in its national history, and the message behind it is unmistakable. Canada's North will no longer be overlooked. It will be defended, developed, and firmly controlled by Canada itself.
Our plan to defend, connect, and build the North will reinforce Canada's strategic autonomy. That independence will also be bolstered by the new trade and defense partnerships that we are striking with trusted partners.
The Arctic is transforming faster than almost any other region on the planet. And today, Canada made one of the most significant strategic moves in its modern history to prepare for that future. A $40 billion investment. New military bases, massive infrastructure development, and an economic corridor capable of reshaping the entire northern frontier. The question now is straightforward. Will this strategy secure Canada's Arctic before the world's major powers move in? Or is this only the first step in a much larger geopolitical competition? One thing is clear. The race for the Arctic has begun, and Canada is no longer standing still. Subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analysis of the geopolitical developments shaping Canada and the world.